The last thing that I would do is disappoint Neil Gaiman. You know, if anybody has the one-way ticket, the conduit into the ether and the dreaming, it's that dude. And I'd like to be able to dream peacefully from here on out. I don't want to make that enemy. I'm always mindful of the fact that if you're picking up this comic book, it's because you like the novel. You know, if you're picking up this comic book, it's because you like Neil. So being sure that the audience for it gets the thing that they think they want.
You talked about the Anansi Boys, and so I'm curious to know what it's like to be pretty much handpicked by Neil Gaiman. And I know you had a relationship with him prior. It's not like he just found out about you or something. But obviously, it's a big name. A lot of people, really respect his work. So, what is it like to adapt something like that and give it your own voice? Like, how carefully do you tread? And then also being friends with Neil, like you don't want to disappoint him. So how closely are you working with him?
The last thing that I would do is disappoint Neil Gaiman. And I think for both personal reasons and like fear of like magical elf reprisal or something. Like, if anybody has the one-way ticket, the conduit into the ether and the dreaming, it's that dude. And I'd like to be able to dream peacefully from here on out. I don't want to make that enemy. The process for me is always this kind of the same process with adaptation. In its at first do no harm, right? Like the book works. Like
Yes.
there's no problems with it. I don't have to fix anything in it. The adaptation work is really like this prose isn't laying down correctly in a on the page. Like it needs some invention so that it functions as comic book storytelling.
Sure.
So now we've got to invent, in some cases characters, definitely in some cases, I was also trying to not have long stretches of narration, to mimic the feeling of reading the book. Because reading a Neil Gaiman book is like Neil is kind of talking to you, and his voice is so specific and so clear. And the temptation is to want to try and replicate that.
Right.
But then it feels less like a comic book and more like, oh, this is just like a novel with some pictures,
hybrid,
with huge blocks of captions to recreate that. So it's finding ways to either put some of that stuff in characters' mouths, to pare it down when you could kind of get some of the humor visually and not kind of textually. But it's always, I'm always mindful of the fact that if you're picking up this comic book, it's because you like the novel. If you're picking up this comic book, it's because you like Neil. So being sure that the audience for it gets the thing that they think they want, and then finding ways to surprise them in the same process, which is, oh, I didn't know that character looked like that, or I didn't know this would, or didn't think this was in this place, or, finding those beats where you can actually play the humor and finding those parts that can actually feel as authentic as possible. I think, Neil did an immense amount of research for this book specifically, because I think even at the time, and he's gone on record saying, I don't think I would write that book today. I don't think me, white ex-Londoner, would write a book specifically about sort of Caribbean expats in London, almost entirely populated by characters of color. In cultures that he doesn't naturally have access to. Now, I personally believe that this is the job, right? Like, we're writers. I should not have to have lived experience in a thing to be able to write it. That's why I write things. I'm making up characters, but I'm doing the work to make sure that it feels right. And Neil did a lot of fucking work to make sure that Anansi Boys felt right. The conversation about who gets to write what is a newly originating conversation. I believe anybody can write anything so long as you do the work. And Neil did the work. That said, there's little bits of it. Like, I come from a Caribbean background, all of my grandparents were Caribbean. none of them were British, but even still, like that is lived experience for me.
Sure.
In ways that are not for some other people. And so being able to kind of look at this work and just remember things that kind of like I remember as a kid, you know, especially from, you know, a coterie of old women, you know, having their own feelings about your future and what they'll do and what they'll say.
Nice.
You know, there's one exchange. I hope I'm not talking out of school about this, but there's a character in the book. These four black women are basically like, you know, the witches in Macbeth, and they're all from the Caribbean. But I changed the race of one of them to Chinese, and you know, the note back was, but these women were black in the novel. I'm like, yeah, I know, but here's the thing. There are Chinese Caribbean people. Like the Caribbean was half of which was British colonies. Hong Kong is a British colony. Like my grandfather was from Trinidad. Half of Trinidad is Indian, from India, because the British colonies just become this sort of very fluid, you know, transition thing. And I'm like,
sure.
I think it's interesting if one of these women is Chinese. You know, and it reflects the reality of what it's like on Jamaica. Like, yeah, there's Chinese Jamaicans. There just are.
Right.
He's like, all right, well, when people come for you, I'm going to point them at you. That was your choice, sir. I was like, I'll defend it. But, you know, he's been incredibly gracious and incredibly kind and also incredibly, you know, like, hey, this adaptation is your thing. The novel is my thing. He's already, you know, producing the TV adaptation of the novel. He's gotten to adapt it already, you know, and make all the choices he wanted to make. I haven't seen the TV show, so I don't know what choices those are. So there get to be now, there get to be 3 iterations of this book, you know, all that are kind of different. But all kind of, and that's interesting. Like, you know, we're all doing a cover band versions of Anansi Boys.
Right. No, that is pretty cool. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I wasn't sure if you were involved. That was going to be my next question: is if you were involved with the Amazon TV series at all. And
I am not.
Do you feel any competition to compete? I know it's 2 different medium, but do you feel any kind of pressure to like live up to what the TV series is going to be?
I'm not going to say it's pressure, but there's definitely like, I think we're going to hit this scene. You know, even knowing the things that we can't do, which is like music. You know, like this is a very musical kind of story.
Sure.
And so like that is not in our toolbox. But the art by Sean Martinborough is amazing. The colors by Chris Sotomayor
he's incredible. Yeah.
They're astonishing. You know, just the color work, like it feels sort of surreal and avant-garde, and the color theory is so interesting that the TV show won't be that. It can't.
And you also have the advantage of being published first, right? You're going to be published before the TV series comes out. So you beat him to the punch.
We beat him to the punch. But no, it's been a wonderful experience, and also like this is one of those where getting to talk to Sean about it early on, like even before I wrote the first script, knowing that he'd be the artist, be like, how do you want to work? Like, what makes you happy? Like, what do you want to draw? What don't you want to draw? You know, what tickles your fancy? What you know, fucking pisses you in your cereal? And he's just like, hey man, the script is the Bible, and if the book is the Bible, then we're good. It's like, I know what the book is, so there's nothing in it that I don't want to draw, but just don't add lots of helicopters. It's like, all right, that's fair.
Hey gang, if you click the link below and sign up for our Substack, you'll receive a free visual storytelling guide that covers all the basics of storytelling, camera work, and composition. Whether you're a storyboard artist, comic artist, or filmmaker, it's a great way to get you up and running. And it's our way of saying thank you.
You also worked on a graphic novel that I think I read last year, called Messenger, The Messenger, the story, A Legend of Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And so what was, because I had heard that it took like 10 years or something to get done, but I wanted to ask you, from growing up in the 70s, what did Muhammad Ali mean to you? And what was it like to take on this project?
I mean, Muhammad Ali, in growing up in the 70s, was not the greatest period of Muhammad Ali's sort of career. Especially when like by the late 70s, early 80s, like he was terribly diminished as a boxer. Like just the speed wasn't there, the flair wasn't there, like the mouth still moved, but the feet couldn't keep up. And so my sort of experience with Ali was more like, oh, Apollo Creed is supposed to be Ali in his prime. So like I kind of get a feel for what that is, right? Like that was always the comparison. It wasn't until the 96 Olympics, I think, that sort of shifted my feelings about Ali. And it's the lighting of the torch, right? It's the like, this wave of admiration that even as a person who didn't quite know, like I sort of abstractly knew what Muhammad Ali meant, because it's hard to grow up in America, in a media landscape like ours and not know who he was and kind of what he stood for and, the Vietnam sort of protests and all of that stuff. But I hadn't actively engaged with him as a boxer. Like I'm more engaged with him as a public figure. But then, the Parkinson stuff and all of that. But then when you watch the 96 Olympics and you just watch this, like just this torrent of just appreciations and emotion and like flashback footage and everything like that spurred me as just a person to kind of go back and start to revisit that stuff. And hey, most of those fights are on YouTube, because thankfully that exists as an archive that we have access to. And so when First Second reached out, because they were looking for what I have to imagine at the time, and may even still be true, a very small Venn diagram of things. Like they wanted a person who knew how to write comic books, they wanted a person who liked sports, and they wanted a person who had some journalistic background. I don't know how many people fit all of those things, and they're like, bonus, a person who's Black. I think the iris began to tighten in almost every way.
Cool.
And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, sure. No, I get it. I'm a fan, 100%. And then it took me like a year of just being afraid of it, because I began like kind of poking at it, and it's the biggest life, like this guy is maybe the most famous person of the 20th century, and easily perhaps the most documented person, the most written about person, more so than maybe JFK as like an assassinated president is the only thing that's sort of comparable. But like the Beatles wanted a picture with him and not the other way around.
Oh, wow.
So like I was a little petrified of Ali going into it because he is so big. And I don't think we wanted to do a straight like cradle to grave even at the time he was still alive, so like cradle to just old story. But then I saw the Steve Jobs movie, the Aaron Sorkin, Danny Boyle Steve Jobs movie that found a way to tell that life through 3 events, through 3 product launches. And I was like, oh, all right. Well, what if we just then pick like 10 events that seem seminal in his life and use those events to fill in the blanks and to kind of, sketch who he was at any given time. And we'll treat them like they're rounds. So like round 1 is going to be against Spike Stolen. Round 2 is the Olympics in Rome. And, round 3 is the first fight with Sonny Liston. And, and then just figuring out ways so that it wasn't also just a boxing book. Because, as great as Ron Salas, the artist, was at actually like selling the punching and the boxing, and like that was always my biggest concern, was like, how are we going to get this on the page? How is this speed going to translate?
Right.
And Ron found a way. Like Ron's work was just astonishing. But it's like, you can't just be that, and he was more than that. So then it's now we got to get into the Howard Cosell of it all. And we got to have a chapter that is just a conversation to represent every conversation that he had with Cosell and his relationship with the media. We're going to do the Esquire magazine cover, the Saint Sebastian with the arrows pointing out of it, and what that process was like and how that was sort of emblematic of his beginning to question the Nation of Islam and faith, and they encouraged him to do it because it would be good for the money, not because he would have had a problem potentially with portraying a Catholic saint on the cover of a magazine, which is what his issues were. to talking about, Parkinson's diagnosis and rescuing hostages from Iraq, which I did not know was a thing that he did until I discovered it sort of much later into my research.
Yeah. That is so amazing.
Yeah. And so like once there seemed to be a plan, once there seemed to be a way to wrap our heads around it, I mean, it was still a beast of a thing to write. I think so. It's the single longest thing I've ever written at, 223 pages, I think the script finally was.
Wow.
It was, once we figured out how to break it down, it felt way more just, all right, this is just, it's a chewable. It's fine. Like, we can do these 20 pages. We can do these 23 pages, these 19 pages, whatever it was.
Right.
And I remain incredibly proud of it. I'm thrilled that, like libraries seem to have embraced it, and it's on like these like reading lists and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I read it, it was just like, it was just so, the chemistry between you and Ron, it just was like, this is so distinct, and I think it has longevity to it. And I'm like, by the time I finished it, I'm like, now I want one on Bruce Lee, and like, what else can you do?
I know. Although I was very clear, with first, second, even in the intro, I was like, if you're like studying for a test on Muhammad Ali, then you will fail if this is your only source, because like some of it's true, a lot of it's factual, some of it is completely made up. It's the legend of Muhammad Ali, not the biography of Muhammad Ali.
Right.
But even still, like, it just, I remain proud of it, and it did take a while, like, between that and A Door in the Distance before it. These were two books that took, the better part of decades to go from sort of idea to execution. And, I hope that is not the only way that I can do long form work. That takes decades to generate, because I'm running out of decades. But even still, they do remain these sort of things that I'm incredibly proud to have done. And I'm incredibly honored to be able to do with the collaborators I was able to do them with.
Shane and I really appreciate you guys tuning into our YouTube channel today. If you enjoyed this short conversation and would like to see the entire interview, then please head on over to our Substack, where you'll not only find all of our full-length interviews, but a ton of super interesting posts that we've created just for you guys. Link is in the description box below. So until next time, thanks for watching.